Israel is no longer just fighting a battle in the south against Hamas. A second front is opening in the north. Hezbollah in Lebanon is intensifying their campaign. Their goal, same as Hamas, decimate Israel with rockets and mortars. Israel sustaining casualties already this weekend from the Iranian-backed Hezbollah forces. Israeli military bases are under assault. Hezbollah snipers also neutralizing Israeli surveillance cameras on the border, creating blind spots, appearing to gear up for a full-on invasion. And Israel's responding, evacuating towns and villages near the border and preemptively striking Hezbollah's installations. Israel's promised to destroy Hezbollah if they formally enter the war. The risk for Israel is real. If Hezbollah fully engages Israel's northern flank, they'd be forced to divert resources from the south, weakening their ground action in Gaza and giving Hamas breathing room. Hamas, who's already shown an ability to theatrically ambush unsuspecting Israeli forces, are even launching amphibious assaults. Jihadists were caught swimming towards the Israeli shoreline, triggering the IDF to scramble their navy. Whether it's swimming, paragliding, or suicide bombing, the butchers are highly motivated to ravage the Israeli civilian population. Body cam footage shows Hamas savagely ripping the life out of a small Israeli town, targeting civilians like Al-Qaeda. Forensic analysis shows signs of torture, rape, and mutilation. These animals make the Russian military look civilized. But as Israel prepares their full-scale ground operation, there's a concern that their intelligence agencies have been infiltrated. The New York Times is reporting that on the first day of the attack, Hamas penetrated an Israeli military base and shot their way into Israel's intelligence nerve. Israeli military computer systems were vulnerable to exploitation. Top secret intelligence may have been compromised. Currently, after its initial siege, Hamas is hunkered down like tunnel rats in their underground lair, plotting, holding hostages, laying booby traps, and manufacturing drones and Stinger missiles. Is there a second wave? Is this a trap? The Israelis found a cache of weapons left behind for a future offensive.
You can see here rocket-propelled grenades recovered by the Israeli military in the southern part of their country. They say they found about 1,000 of these brought in by Hamas fighters to use against Israeli communities along the border.
Iran has called the Hamas attacks glorious and is warning Israel that invading Gaza would open the gates of hell. There's no denying that. It's just a matter of which side inflicts more hell on the other. A similar battle happened in Fallujah, Iraq, where American forces fought in close quarters, building to building, block by block, and rooted out Sunni insurgents, militias, and former Baathists. It was some of the most intense urban warfare we've ever seen. Let's bring in David Belavia, Medal of Honor recipient and author of House to House, and Bret former Army Special Ops and Fox News contributor. All right, David, describe the close quarters combat situation where you're basically blind, except maybe, 10 feet in front of you?
Well, you know, that's all about dominating the battle space, dominating the room, dominating, you building up the morale. These are your soldiers. You love them like your family. They're part of your family. And when you get into a fight like that, you're well aware that the enemy is just trying to neutralize our technology by getting us in a confined space. But there are like 5 or 6 other buddies of these terrorists in the next building over, and we're going to walk out of this building, and we're going to walk out of this building together, and that means breaking the will of the enemy. So the next house, the next booby trap, they know exactly what they got into when they started a fight with the United States. And so it's swagger, it's confidence, but your confidence goes up and down. You're all over the place because you realize that it doesn't matter how well you're equipped or how well you're trained. You got a machine gun in front of you, and they're rattling off rounds at point blank range. So it's what you're fighting for, the people you're with, it's your training. But there's something, the secret sauce is the NCO in an infantry fight, and the NCO in the infantry that is constantly pushing his subordinates and dominating the battle space.
What are the biggest lessons that the United States military learned from somewhere like Fallujah?
Well, you know, the enemy thought that we wouldn't take the fights in the Pacific campaign, and they guessed wrong in against the World War II generation. The Viet Cong and the North Vietnamese thought that, you know, we were just a bunch of hippies out in Woodstock. They had no idea what our army was consisted of back then. Our enemies have been guessing against the United States from the beginning. So they thought, well, we're not going to take that fight. We're Gen X. We cut our jeans and listen to Kurt Cobain. We're lazy. They watch TV and think we're the Jerry Springer generation, and we knew that they would not respect us in that close quarter environment. I'm telling you, you get a window into the soul of the men and women around you, and the generation that got through Anbar Province and Diyala Province and Mosul and Ramadi and Fallujah, that generation is amongst the greatest American warriors we've seen.
So, Bret, what are they thinking in these Hamas tunnels? They've just pulled off a spectacular surprise attack. They're hunkered down. They have hostages. They're rearming. They haven't really been assaulted yet by the full force of the ground forces of the IDF. What's their calculation now?
Well, I think they have to expect Israel to respond grossly disproportionate this time and over the top, because this surprise incursion can never happen again. And I think we're going to see from the Israelis this time when they go into Gaza, it's going to be different. Their forces are going to go take their time. They're going to go block by block. They're going to go through these tunnels meticulously. The military operation, it has to focus on restoring deterrence. And, you know, I'm already seeing some public calls for ceasefires from various groups who are demanding the Israelis already only within a week of this disgusting terrorist attack stop their response, and that the IDF have already gone too far with just these retaliatory airstrikes in Gaza, which I find absurd. You know, typically when they've gone into Gaza territory, after a few days, this international support fades. There's demands for a ceasefire. You know, they get this worldwide pressure to stop. But I've said it before, and I'll say it again. Stopping the IDF's next military action would be a major mistake. We need to back them. As Americans, we need to give them the time and space to crush Hamas once and for all. This is a group that only understands strength. And when the Israelis did nothing, look what happened to them. Hamas came in, they killed, they kidnapped, they raped and pillaged. This is a conflict that cannot be stopped any longer with talking. And they're even holding American hostages right now. We have very little information about the status of these Americans because Hamas took them as an insurance policy against retaliatory action. And it's proof that Hamas is just as much a danger to our way of life as well. So we need to let the Israelis root out terrorism, do what they need to do, strike Hamas where it hurts, and make it so, this doesn't ever happen again.
I agree. You got to let them go at it. It's the only way you're going to get complete and full victory here. Bret, David, thank you guys so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Fox News alert, Secretary of State Antony Blinken just announced President Biden will visit Israel on Wednesday after his disastrous 60 Minutes interview last night.
Correct.
Biden said there's no clear evidence that Iran was involved. In other words, he's couching it. Why can't he say the intelligence shows they had pre-planned knowledge? It took 24 hours for the Wall Street Journal to crack that case. Well, he doesn't want to say it because it means that he's going to have to deal with it. Since we've been funding this country for so long, and getting stuck in a Mideast sandpit in election year is dangerous. So the president just says, don't. Don't what? Pele puts words in his mouth. Is Pele president? But after 1,400 Israelis got slaughtered, President Pele thinks a siege of Gaza would be an occupation. All right, so why is the president talking about a Palestinian state when Hamas is butchering our strongest ally? How do you say Hamas doesn't represent the Palestinian people when they voted Hamas in to represent them? Why do you think the Saudis or the Egyptians aren't opening their doors for the Palestinians? These are savages, and Israel cannot coexist with them. The president should be encouraging our allies to defend themselves, not sway them around from this ground offensive. Every day that goes by and they don't root out these Islamic tunnels, it's another day that the United Nations, the Arab League, and these skittish American politicians are going to say, ceasefire. And when the Middle East goes up in flames, we're going to be right back where we started. But it looks like they're already mobilizing. The Pentagon says they have 2,000 troops ready to deploy to Israel. We have two hot wars going on, one in Europe and now in the Middle East, on top of an open border where Middle Easterners are pouring through unchecked. Joe Biden does not have control, and this makes Americans. He's running for president because of the world. He didn't mention America, didn't mention Americans. He's running because he's trying to salvage the Biden brand, the statesman. But under Biden, the Mideast is more unpredictable and more dangerous than ever. Under Trump, there was unprecedented stability. Abraham Accords, undid the Iran nuke deal, killed Soleimani, Baghdadi. We thought we were out of the Mideast, but now we're right back in the middle of it. And you can expect all of this to be front and center in next year's debate.
Biden has three major problems, and they all begin with the letter I: inflation, immigration, and incompetence. The USA is a mess. Israel is under attack. Our economy is cratering. Inflation is totally out of control. 2024 is our final battle. It's our final battle. This country is going to either be greater than ever before, or we're not going to have a country. That's how bad it all is.
Joining me now, host of the Monica Crowley podcast, Monica Crowley. So the president's going to Israel Wednesday. What's that going to do?
Well, I think he's going to try to reassure our Israeli allies that the United States supports them, will provide whatever resources they need to take on this war with Hamas. But the bigger question is Iran, which he refused to address last night on 60 Minutes. The problem for this president is he is inherently weak. You know, Joe Biden has always been a corrupt hack. Now he's a corrupt hack leading, the greatest military force on the face of the earth and supposedly the free world. But every time the United States is either weak in real terms or perceived as weak, the good guys retreat, the bad guys advance, and the wheels come off the world. This is exactly what we're seeing now, and no trip to Israel is going to change the international dynamic. There is a reason why Hamas and Hezbollah, as well as the Russians and the Chinese and terrorist organizations around the world, are advancing right now, because they know that there's not going to be any kind of meaningful retaliation from the President of the United States or America as a whole.
What kind of meaningful retaliation would a President Crowley initiate?
Well, look, the Israelis can certainly handle this. When you
You'd
look
let
at
the Israelis handle it.
Absolutely, and that's what they are requesting. They are requesting hands off. We know how to handle this. Let us do it. Give us the moral support we need. Let us know that you're there. Send a signal to our adversaries, including Iran, that you mean business.
Has he sent that signal when he says don't?
Nobody
don't.
knows. Nobody knew what that meant.
Well, because Pele just filled in the rest of the sentence for the president.
Right. Of course, the mainstream media always fills in the gaps for this president who can't even string a sentence together. They hold him by the hand and walk him through this because they know he's a walking catastrophe.
How long does President Biden give the Israeli ground offensive in Gaza to succeed? Because it's a time game.
It absolutely is. It looks like it's imminent if it hasn't started already. The Israelis know they have to move with all deliberate speed because they know that the international community is going to come down hard on them once these images of killed Palestinian children start going around the world. They've got a free hand now because they have the sympathy of the vast majority of the world. They've got to go in, strike, do it fast.
So they've now gotten the sympathy. But they haven't gone in yet. Why haven't they fully gone in on the ground in Gaza?
Well, they've been engaged from the air. They've done very strategic surgical airstrikes. Yes. They've also warned the Gazans, the civilians in Gaza, get out. There's been the civilian corridor into Egypt.
But are they losing the goodwill of their backers?
Well, they're walking a very fine line because they know they have to go into Gaza and clean out Hamas, but they also know that they have to protect civilian life as well as they can. This is what the Israelis do really well. They get no credit for it, but they do it really well. Look, under President Trump for 4 years, we had a booming economy and world peace. Now we have an economy in collapse, a wide open border, national security threats everywhere, and the world aflame. So we know how to deliver peace in Europe, in the Middle East, in East Asia, and yet this president threw everything that President Trump did in reverse. Trump led with strength. This president doesn't even lead with weakness. He's just projecting weakness, and so therefore it's no mystery that America's enemies are on the march.
You mean President Pelley? Because I get confused who's president sometimes. Monica, thank you.
A pleasure. Thanks.
Fox News Alert Secretary of State Antony Blinken just announced Joe Biden is going to Israel.
On Wednesday, President Biden will visit Israel. He's coming here at a critical moment for Israel, for the region, and for the world.
John Roberts is live in Israel with the latest. John.
You know, Blinken is really burning the midnight oil because don't forget, it's about 20 minutes after 3 here in Israel, and he just made that announcement moments ago. In fact, he was scheduled to do an interview with us last evening. They said they had to cancel it because there were so many moving parts and things were moving very, very quickly. So I guess they were putting together this visit by the president during that whole evening. Blinken has been here for a few days now. He's traveled to all of our Middle Eastern allies, trying to reassure them that the United States is still on their side. Even countries like Qatar, which has been acting as a go-between between Iran and Hamas. Which raised a lot of eyebrows here in Israel because Qatar is also trying to negotiate the release of these hostages. So I'm trying to read the tea leaves here. Biden coming, Jesse, on Wednesday, as all these Israeli troops have been sitting there massed along the border with their heavy armor and tanks. We thought that they were going to go in on Friday. Then on Sunday, we heard something about, well, the weather's not right. Now Biden is coming on Wednesday. There won't be any ground operation before then. So I'm trying to figure out here and put the pieces together. Is Biden going to try to talk Bibi Netanyahu out of mounting a major ground operation, or will he give Israel his full support behind it? Don't forget, last week, President Biden said that the U.S. was standing fully behind Israel. And then last night on 60 Minutes, he said, well, I don't think it would be a good idea for Israel to reoccupy Gaza. That's an important statement because if Israel completes its task, Jesse, or stated task at least, of getting rid of Hamas, Israel's got to do something to govern that area. You can't leave a power vacuum because anytime that happens, the next bad guy just steps in and takes over. So we'll be watching and waiting to see the posture of the IDF forces, whether they go into a little bit more of a relaxed posture. Now, that is to say, still with full security, but not looking like they're going to cross the border imminently. And whether Biden will try to talk Netanyahu out of a full-scale ground operation, because criticism worldwide to this operation is mounting. Egypt's El-Sisi said on Sunday to Antony Blinken that Israel had gone beyond its right of self-defense now to what he called collective punishment of the Palestinians.
Yeah, they're under pressure internationally and the clock's ticking for sure. But you're right, the timing of the visit is interesting because in Europe, there are a lot of other leaders in the West who went to Kyiv and visited Ukraine during that assault from Russia. Joe Biden was last. And now all of a sudden he's 10 days into this thing and he's already there, first foreign leader on the ground. What does that tell you, that messaging, that symbolic messaging?
Well, you just have to look at history here. How many U.S. presidents have gone to a nation that's already at war and poised to mount a ground invasion? I can't remember any, Jesse. So the fact that he's coming here as these Israeli forces are poised to go into Gaza, I think is part of a bigger program here. I don't want to say he's looking for a ceasefire, but there may be some inkling of a de-escalation. We'll just have to wait and see.
Oh, well, that would blow up in his face if there's a de-escalation push while he's there, after those atrocities are still seared into the memories of the Israeli population, into the world, I think that would do severe damage to Israel's security and severe damage to Joe Biden's standing here at home and abroad.
You're right on that front, but I think here's what the U.S. is looking at after Blinken's shuttle diplomacy. And the fact that he's still here, he's going to Amman, Jordan from here, and apparently he's going to stay in the region for a while, and that's probably to help cover the president's visit. But I think that there's a sense, Jesse, that if the ground operation is mounted, that the region could blow up, that Hezbollah could get involved, that it's got all those guided missiles, and the first target, the top target will be Tel Aviv. And we've seen what's happened over the past week with Hamas firing rockets toward Tel Aviv. Sirens were going off all day today. So if Hezbollah were to get involved and then another nation got involved, I mean, this thing could quickly grow into a conflagration, which is why the USS Gerald Ford is here, the Eisenhower is on its way, and now the 26th Marine Expeditionary Unit, which was doing exercises in the Red Sea, is moving closer to Israel. We don't know if it's going to go up the western side of the Sinai Peninsula through the Suez into the Mediterranean, or it might move closer to the Gulf of Aqaba and the southern Israeli city of Eilat. That remains to be seen as well. But the full force of U.S. deterrence is on display here, with the idea that this could turn into a tinderbox very quickly if this ground operation gets underway.
And that deterrence has to be believable, because if it's not believable, then Hezbollah is going to counter, the Iranians, the Syrians, they could counter. So really the entire credibility of the commander-in-chief is on the line. If he wants to give the Israelis room to maneuver in Gaza, that threat has to be real and it has to be believable. And I think it's going to be tested over the next week. John, thank you. I got to run, though.
It's going to be a very big trip for the president.
It really is. It's going to be consequential. We'll see how it shakes out. Thank you. Stay safe out there. Fox News alert. The Squad is calling for a ceasefire. Cori Bush, Rashida Tlaib want Israel to stop defending themselves after Hamas killed their babies and over 1,000 civilians. When there's a shooting here, Democrats want to take away your guns. They start saying the Second Amendment's outdated and talk about ghost guns. But when Hamas goes into daycare centers and schools targeting kids, Squad calls for a ceasefire. They say, let's talk things out, Hamas. Israel, don't defend yourself. Don't avenge your kids. Just sit there and take it. Meanwhile, Ilhan Omar, the chair of the Hamas caucus, posted a photo of dead children. She said, look what Israel did. But the photo was 10 years old, and it was from Syria, and it had nothing to do with Israel. They'll do anything it takes to paint Israel as evil. The Squad doesn't care that most Palestinians back Sharia law. Half of them support suicide bombing. Palestinians don't support gender equality, free speech, gay rights. Doesn't matter, because there's an appetite for political violence on the left, and it's coming from the top down. Our politicians, our corporate leaders, and our legacy media. But it all starts at the universities. There's a pipeline of indoctrination going from our schools to the highest levels of government and the private sector. Universities are breeding grounds for political violence. They're madrasas, where professors groom students to become politically bloodthirsty. Those students end up in Congress, in newsrooms, and running companies that donate millions to bail out rioters. In college, you learn who the victims are and who the victimizers are, and that you must do whatever it takes to tear them down. At Columbia University, a professor called the Hamas terror attacks awesome, said Hamas had a stunning victory against the cruel Israeli colonizers. This professor, Joseph Mossad, has been talking like this for years. His job is to convince young Americans that anybody who disagrees with them is evil.
The reaction of U.S.-backed regimes in the region, in general, has remained the same, meaning that the goal of their reaction or the next steps they wish to take is how to preserve and secure the apartheid Jewish supremacist regime in Israel.
So Hamas are the good guys because they're anti-colonialism and anti-imperialism, just like BLM. In 2020, our cities were burned to the ground. Our businesses raided. People were killed. There should have been a full throttle condemnation from our media, from our politicians. Instead, CNN called the riots mostly peaceful. Kamala bailed out the rioters, and local Democrats chopped police budgets. It's what they learned in school. BLM violence is justified because police are bad and criminals are victims. Antifa has been free to operate in the streets for years. When Trump took office, we saw Antifa rise. They covered their faces with masks, but we knew who they were. Skinny white liberals straight off campus. Professors joined Antifa. This is a violent group dedicated to overthrowing the government. But the government says they're just an idea. Antifa doesn't exist because they're fighting the oppressors. They're only okay with violence if they can justify the cause. It's okay to parachute into a country, kidnap people, unload machine gun fire into concerts, because they were taught Palestinians are victims of a land dispute. It's time for the FBI to get off our backs and take a look at what's going on in these pro-terrorist rallies, into BLM, Antifa, and into the domestic madrasas that are infesting our campuses. Elizabeth Pipko joins me now. So it is ironic that there's a school shooting here in America and the left wants to disarm Americans, but if there's a school massacre in Israel, they want a ceasefire. Why is that?
They do, yeah. Look, a lot of the messaging that I have seen coming out of these young advocate groups these last few days has not only been a disturbing push for violence in Israel, but the justification for that violence being the shared lived experience they think they have with the people of Gaza. That proves, if nothing else, an amazing detachment from our reality. It's also naive, ignorant, and laughable at best, and I think it honestly proves that our academic institutions are raising activists instead of critical thinkers.
So it's narcissism. They believe they live an oppressed life here in Manhattan, just like the Palestinians do in Gaza. So they relate to these underdogs, these underdog oppressed people, and they justify violence because, hey, everybody has to fight the colonial powers.
Exactly. Unfortunately, a lot of us who didn't agree with a lot of the messaging coming out of these groups over the last few years, we're probably still a little, happy seeing these young people passionate about fighting injustice anywhere that they saw it in the world. Unfortunately, we have been severely shocked this last week to know that apparently the burning of babies or kidnapping of Holocaust survivors does not count as injustice and does not, does not encourage any kind of rally. Instead, it actually encourages solidarity with those that committed those violent offenses. So I'm confused at best and furious at worst.
Do you see a growing domestic terror threat coming from within universities?
I do. Like I said, these institutions are academic institutions that we have relied on for years to train critical thinkers are instead doing the opposite of that. They are raising people that not only hate Americans, but actually support terrorism. And that can only lead to one very dangerous result.
Do a lot of these places at these universities get funding from these Arab countries that are trying to, I don't know, launder money into these campuses in order to create hate?
Honestly, I hate to say it, but I would almost hope that they do, because I otherwise cannot understand how this could have happened in the freest, greatest country in the entire world, where we have raised nothing but the best up until very recently.
Yeah, I think the FBI needs to take a hard look at some of these universities and get to the bottom of this.
100%.
Elizabeth, thank you so much.
Thank you.